They said the Atlantic swallowed ships and men in the same way, in silence. But on that cold November dawn, the ocean didn't seem hungry. It seemed watchful. At 5:43 a.m., a shadow sliced through the mist like a beast awakening. It was the USS President, and its breath came in waves of gunpowder and wind. The distant crack of the cable sounded like the breathing of a living animal. Britain didn't know it yet, but here began the nightmare no fleet wanted to face. The deck was covered in salty dew. The cold bit into the sailor's skin. The damp wood creaked under the weight of boots and fear. The wind blew in gusts that felt like warning breaths, and every man tightening a knot knew he might be weaving his last. Decatur on the bridge watched the horizon without blinking, a man made of steel and silence. The air around him seemed to bend, as if discipline had weight. In the crow's nest, the lookout pounded his fist on the mast every minute. "Northeast wind, steady," he shouted, and his voice echoed like muffled thunder. The mist swallowed the sound before the sea returned it in a distant echo. The compass trembled, the metal vibrated as if sensing blood. A storm petrel landed on the mizzen stay, and for an instant the world seemed to hold its breath. On the enemy frigate Endymion, British Lieutenant Isaac Brand buttoned his coat and noted in his journal, "The Americans are out again, stubborn, foolish, defying the heavens." He smiled, a short, forced laugh. A heavy frigate doesn't make a navy. He closed the journal and scanned the horizon. The smile died in his eyes. That shadow in the fog seemed more like an omen than a target. The bell tolled half an hour. The men of the President brushed shoulders, performing rituals learned in haste and fear. The gunner checked powder barrels, each lid sealed with wax and faith. The air smelled of sulfur, wood, and nerves. Micro reward, 1,576 tons. White oak hull, 44 24-pounder cannons. Weight and speed in a deadly pact. In the magazine, the bosun's crew moved grapeshot like monks in a temple. Each fuse was handled as both life and sentence at once. The sound of footsteps echoed rhythmically, like the drum of a panicked heart. The entire ship seemed to pulse, alive, aware of what was coming. The tension was almost tangible, thick as smoke. Underestimating the new is war's oldest mistake. Britain sailed on centuries of tradition, but the President was made of pure rebellion. The difference between past and future now had a keel. The Atlantic would be judge, not audience. Decatur descended a step, his hand running over worn pins, eyes measuring invisible angles. "The mainsail needs a 2-degree adjustment," he said, and the crew obeyed without thinking. No man argued with him, not out of fear, but faith. The captain didn't just command the ship, he commanded fate. Anne Bradbury, hidden under her soaked hood, wrote in silence. "They are afraid, but they'd rather not retreat," she scribbled. The wind carried away some letters, but not the meaning. The sea around them was witness, and even the waves seemed to listen. Courage was the common language on board. Final micro reward, maximum firing rate 3 shots per minute per gun, effective range 1,200 meters, sustained speed 11 knots. Each number a promise of glory. The sun rose timidly, reflecting on the cannons like polished blades. The sea took a deep breath, and war began to close in.
They say war reveals monsters, but sometimes it reveals something worse, men who become legends. When Stephen Decatur crossed the deck that cold morning, no one dared speak. He didn't need to shout to command, he just had to exist. The mist parted before him as if even the wind knew his name. His eyes were beacons of decision, and each step a promise of victory or grave.
Decatur was more than captain. He was the living symbol of American stubbornness. He had faced pirates in Tripoli, survived storms and politicians. Now, before the Atlantic, he saw a proving ground, not fear. He kept a small cracked compass in his pocket, a memento of a lost ship, and a vow made to the sea. "I'll never let them call us amateurs," he repeated, like a silent prayer. On the other side, a British bosun mocked. "Decatur, the American who thinks he's Nelson." The laugh was brief, forced, and died in the same instant. "He's the kind of man who turns defeat into myth," another replied. In the silence that followed, only the sea dared interrupt. Even his enemies respected him without admitting it. Emotional contrast. The President throbbed between superstition and bravery. A cabin boy drew a salt cross on the deck, hiding the gesture under a bucket. The cook tapped his ladle 3 times on the cauldron's rim. "Good luck ritual." Men prayed in whispers, each to a different god. No one wanted to die. Everyone wanted to be part of history. Anne watched the captain from afar, notebook in hand. She saw in him something beyond authority, a kind of contained storm. He didn't seem to fight the British, but time itself. "He has the eyes of a man who knows every victory costs more than it's worth," she wrote. The wind snatched the paper for an instant, but she recovered it. Fate, for now, still obeyed. White oak hull, with 40 extra tons of reinforcement, angles calculated to distribute recoil and reduce vibration. Each shot absorbed with 30% less deformation. It was engineering with soul, mathematics with courage. The ship seemed made not just of wood, but of conviction. Decatur walked among the artillery pieces, touching the breech blocks with his fingertips. "No haste, no failure, no waste," he said, voice low, firm. Every man who heard felt the weight of the promise. Discipline wasn't born of fear, but faith, and that faith had a name: Stephen Decatur. Leadership is war's loneliest weapon. No shoulder bears the weight of the final order. Each command is an invisible burden no manual teaches how to carry. Decatur accepted that burden as both sentence and glory. His silence was worth more than 1,000 speeches. Crew of 450 men, 44 cannons, 32-pounder carronades. Sails with a total area of 4,000 square feet, quick-response teak rudder. Every detail calculated for the impossible. Anne observed it all: the rhythm, the gaze, the control. It was like watching the mechanics of fate in real time. When the sun first rose on the President's deck, the bronze gleam reflected on the captain's face. For an instant, it seemed the ship and the man were one being. The sea rumbled low, as if in approval. And Anne wrote the line that would close her report. "England has a fleet. America has faith. Today the ocean will decide which weighs more." The New York shipyard seemed to breathe, cough, and dream to the same rhythm as the men who inhabited it. Hammers struck in unison, producing a metallic music that echoed among the docks like iron hymns. The USS President emerged under the gray dawn light, its hull gleaming with pitch and human sweat. With every mallet blow, the wood responded as if feeling pain and pride at once. December's cold cut the air, but the heat of forges and ambition kept everyone upright. Anne Bradbury walked among the workers with her soaked hood and notebook clutched to her chest. The sound of saws and the smell of coal clung to her like a tattoo. She watched Decatur in silence, surrounded by engineers and officers debating angles, strength, and speed. "It's more than a ship," she thought. "It's a declaration." Every screw, every plank, every sewn sail seemed to carry the weight of a nation wanting to prove it could challenge an empire. On the other side of the bay, 2 British agents watched from a discreet rowboat. One noted in his journal, "The Americans build too fast, but without soul." The other, older, didn't reply. He just watched the ship's reflection in the sea and murmured, "There's something dangerous in that silence." The distant hammering carried an almost human cadence, as if the ocean itself were clapping in approval. British pride was beginning to bow to foreboding. Decatur crossed the shipyard like a general among invisible soldiers. His orders were short, but no one dared ask twice. He touched the hull, assessed the wood's sound, eyed the yardarm alignments like reading a prophecy. "Firmer, lighter, faster," he said, and the echo of those words guided the carpenter's hands. Technical micro-reward, double white oak reinforcement, internal copper beam, 15% reduction in cannon recoil vibration. American engineering turned haste into precision. When tradition is lacking, obstinacy becomes science. The President wasn't born just of calculations, but of challenge. Every plank was an act of rebellion, every sail a manifesto of independence. Anne wrote in her notebook, "They're not building a ship, they're building an argument." At night the shipyard fell silent, but the echo of hammers lingered in the tide, as if the ocean had memorized the sound of its new adversary. Dawn arrived with the Atlantic's tense breath.
The mist parted in lines and shadows until in the distance a dark smudge broke the white horizon. "Sails to the west," the lookout shouted, and the deck turned into a living organism. Ropes moved like veins, men ran like blood pushed by adrenaline. The Endymion was in sight, and the ocean became a proving ground. The silence before the chase was the heaviest the sea had ever borne. On the British quarterdeck, Lieutenant Isaac Brand watched the President through his telescope, eyes narrowed against the wind. "They're not fleeing, they're coming." An officer beside him laughed nervously. "Madmen, all of them." But Brand didn't laugh. He saw in the American sails something naval arithmetic couldn't explain: purpose. American arrogance had form, weight, and direction, and for the first time he understood how fear could be born of admiration. Decatur didn't blink. The wind whipped hard. The salty breeze clung to his face like punishment. "Sails to port, adjust course and angle," he ordered, voice calm and sharp. The crew obeyed with almost mechanical precision. But every glance betrayed what the heart tried to hide. The President cut the water like a blade through glass, its bow scoring the Atlantic in lines of defiance. Anne, on the lower deck, wrote amid the pitching, "The sea is the mirror where one sees the size of courage." Sustained speed of 11.3 knots, predicted peak of 13 under favorable wind. Each sail adjusted 27 degrees for lateral propulsion game, reducing drag by 8%. The Endymion, lighter, tried to intercept at 14 knots but lost stability in choppy seas. The sound of waves slapping the hull was like the beat of a military song. Every knot gained equaled a life spared. Audacity, when measured in numbers, ceases to be madness and becomes strategy. Decatur knew the enemy considered him reckless, but he saw what they couldn't calculate: morale. If they fear us today, tomorrow they'll think twice before attacking. The horizon, divided between mist and courage, held the first dance of the frigates, and the Atlantic, silent accomplice, began to choose a side.
The bell's toll cut the wind and announced the arrival of something more dangerous than the enemy: choice. On the deck, Anne Bradbury adjusted her hood and clutched her notebook to her chest, masking nervousness as she watched the captain receive a messenger. The parchment carried an interception, coordinates of a vulnerable British convoy. Decatur read the document in silence, eyes steady and jaw tense. The silence that followed was more eloquent than any order. The decision to attack without official permission turned the ship into a floating secret. No sailor dared question it, but all understood the gesture's weight. The President now sailed against the current and against hierarchy, a vessel in search of honor or condemnation. The sea, indifferent, seemed to wait to see the outcome. Anne recorded every detail, aware that instant would be remembered even if the crew didn't return. History feeds on risk. In the magazine's shadows, Elias Ward watched it all with the calm of one who calculates before betraying. The lantern's glow reflected in his eyes, as if he already knew the end. "A man who defies orders deserves watching," he murmured, folding a small note. In the darkness, he struck a match and sealed the paper with melted wax. No sound escaped, only the sweet and dangerous scent of burning secret. The USS President carried 32 24-pounder guns in the main battery, 3 rounds per minute cadence, effective range of 1,200 meters. Short 32-pounder carronades protected the flanks in close combat. The rudder responded in under 4 seconds per command, a feat for 1,576 tons. Engineering became invisible when fate demanded haste. In the age of gunpowder, intelligence is the deadliest cannon. Anne, decoding messages, understood that modern wars wouldn't be won by muscle or sails, but by minds and maps. Decatur knew the same but said nothing. Sometimes silence is the highest form of command. That night, the President headed east, without blessing, without guaranteed return, and with American pride glowing in the dark like will-o'-the-wisp over the waters. The sea was too calm, and that bothered even the rats. The President glided under a leaden sky, the damp wood creaking at regular intervals. Silence, once an ally, now sounded like conspiracy. Anne walked the narrow corridors, hearing murmurs of distrust and faith. The captain's lost his mind.
"He's making us immortal," another replied. In every phrase, half fear and half hope. Elias Ward exploited the tension like one fanning embers under logs. His voice was calm, his words measured. "No one questions a man until he errs," he said, and poison dripped between smiles. The mutinying rumor grew in low waves, echoing under the deck like held breath. Anne watched him from afar, realizing the danger came not just from enemy sails, but from the cold gaze within their own deck. In the command cabin, Decatur wrote in the logbook. The letters were firm, without hesitation, even as the ship heeled slightly. "There is no bravery without doubt, no loyalty without proof," he noted. Finishing, he looked at the map and traced a line with his finger. The gesture seemed simple, but it held a sentence. Northeast-northeast wasn't just direction, it was a challenge hurled at fate. The President carried stores for 7 days of combat and 20 of sailing. 38 barrels of powder, 480 men, 96 ammunition chests. Mainsails adjusted for 15-knot winds sustained steady advance. Reserve boilers and reinforced copper rudder ensured superior endurance to British frigates. The ship was a perfect body, on the verge of convulsion.
Before facing the enemy, one must conquer fear among one's own men. The captain knew, Anne understood, and Ward exploited. The President sailed divided between faith and doubt, honor and instinct. The ocean, accomplice and judge, watched in silence, as if awaiting the first spark. And in that tense night's silence, even the rudder's noise seemed the sound of a choice about to be made. The bell's toll preceded the thunder. At 2:17 p.m., the USS President's first shot crossed the wind and split the horizon in two. The blast echoed across the waves, startling gulls and men's hearts. The wood shuddered, ropes vibrated, and the deck gained the scent of sulfur and fear. Decatur, impassive, merely tilted his head and murmured, "Mark the impact." War finally ceased to be a concept. The projectile struck a British corvette escorting the convoy, opening a wound of smoke and debris in its hull. The sea reacted by spitting foam and fragments. Anne, gripping the rail, noted amid tremors, "The sea doesn't scream, but it groans." The noise was deafening, each shot sounding like a funeral drumbeat. Sails swayed in sync with the cannons, and the crew fired amid prayers and curses. The captain raised his spyglass and watched the smoke dissipate. "Reload and align. They'll respond." His voice was calm, but his eyes feverish. The second shot fired before the first's echo died. Wood fragments flew from the enemy hull, and the air filled with sun-gilded splinters. The sound of hot bronze mixed with salt was almost music. War had rhythm. Projectile speed 450 meters per second. Effective range 1,200 meters. Recoil reduced by double reinforced beam. Cadence 3 shots per minute with full crew. Each 24-pounder spat 11 kilos of steel and fate. Barrel pressure reached 5,000 psi, and the metal's temperature was enough to cook hope. The President moved like a living creature, fueled by gunpowder and will. The sea is the final judge between calculation and courage. Anne saw men crying as they reloaded, and understood that bravery isn't absence of fear, it's persistence amid terror. By the hour's end, the British corvette was aflame, its deck a mosaic of ash and pride. Decatur wiped soot from his face, eyed the horizon and said, "Now they'll know the name the sea has learned." The rain started fine, but soon became a dense curtain distorting the horizon. The President advanced under thunder, each flash revealing the Endymion's silhouette afar for seconds. The wind's howl mixed with the waves' lash and the ropes groan. "She's behind us," the lookout announced, and fear, once silence, became heavy breathing among the men. The Atlantic roared, hungry for glory. Decatur kept his gaze fixed on the damp map on the table. The compass swung, ink ran, forming omen-like drawings. "Push everything the wind allows,"
he ordered. The President responded like a wounded beast, gaining speed. Its keel cut water like a blade. Anne watched from the hatch, trembling hands on her journal. "The sea seems to follow us with open eyes," she wrote. On the other side, British Captain Henry Hope watched the American ship through his glass. "He's fleeing but wants to be seen," he remarked, frowning. "Novice's arrogance." A younger officer replied, "Or a trap." Hope smiled without humor. "I prefer to believe arrogance." The Endymion adjusted course, pursuing like a patient predator. Rain washed the deck, but not the Pride. Sustained speed, 13 knots. Roll index in rough seas, 8 degrees. Payload, 32 tons of active ammunition. Side sails withstood 45-knot gusts without tearing, thanks to reinforced naval linen weaving. The entire ship seemed built for the impossible, a blend of lightness and ferocity. The snapping sails sounded like accelerated breathing, giant lungs.
The impossible is just the name given to what hasn't been tried yet. As the storm swallowed the horizon, the President held firm, defying physics and logic. Anne looked at Decatur and understood he didn't sail to win, he sailed to prove. They may have empires, she thought, but we have destiny. The sea roared once more, and the hunt continued without mercy or pause. Thunder muffled the sound of the crime. In the lower hold, Elias Ward watched the lamp flame flicker over the encoded note he'd just sealed with British wax. The cannon noise above disguised his betrayal. Raindrops fell through cracks and mixed with the melted wax, partially erasing the signature. "They'll never know," he whispered, hiding the paper under a loose plank. The enemy was already aboard, and no one noticed. Anne descended with her journal in hand, seeking lost notes amid tremors and metallic clamor. Seeing Ward, she felt something odd, a wrong kind of calm. "We need more powder on the main deck," he said, avoiding her eyes. Anne nodded, but noticed the lamp's glow on fresh wax. Intuition whispered what reason ignored. She ascended in silence, heart beating out of rhythm. Betrayal's shadow rose with her. On deck, Decatur received damage reports and issued orders with near-mechanical precision. "Adjust side sails, reinforce the main mast stay." No tremor, no doubt. But trust, once foundation, now began to crack invisibly. The captain looked at Anne as she emerged from the stairs. "Everything in order?" he asked. "Still is," she replied, and lied for the first time in the war. Technical micro-reward. Lantern-based light signaling system. 4-mile visual range on clear nights. The same system, when tampered, could serve as enemy location code from afar. Elias Ward knew every blind spot, every light reflection angle on wet sails. One wrong blink, and death would come with mathematical precision. Espionage in the Gunpowder age demanded as much calculation as courage. No battle is fought only at sea, half happens in shadows. As the President crossed the storm, the enemy infiltrated not through waters, but fractured loyalty. Anne closed her journal and looked at the captain, realizing the nearest danger wore no British flag. The sea roared outside, but the true thunder was about to echo within the deck. Dawn arrived with the metallic taste of exhaustion. Rain had stopped, but mist covered everything like a funeral veil. Decatur watched the horizon, trying to distinguish cloud from cannon smoke. The compass spun slowly, indecisive, mirroring the captain's weary face. Anne approached him and handed him the journal. "Something's wrong," she said, her voice graver than the sea itself. It was the prelude to revelation. Elias Ward ascended to the deck, face pale and posture too rigid for an ordinary man. "Light signals to port, Captain," he announced. Decatur raised his glass and saw the impossible, flashes in British pattern. "How did they find us so fast?" he murmured, already knowing the answer. His gaze met Anne's, and truth collapsed between them. "Him," she said. "Ward." And the name became sentence. The crew reacted before the order. The first mate tried to run, but 2 sailors pinned him as Anne drew the emergency pistol. Morning light reflected on the metal as the shot echoed, tearing the sea's roar. Ward fell, lantern slipping from his hand and rolling to the deck's edge. The flickering flame lit, for an instant, the British symbol engraved on its base. Betrayal now had a face.
Lantern light range, 6 miles, at 80% humidity, intensity of 320 candelas. Ward's code sent signals at 4-second intervals, matching English fleet identification. That precision made the Endymion's pursuit inevitable, now closing within 3 miles. The entire sea seemed to conspire against the President. The hunt was complete. The most dangerous enemy is the one who knows the ship's heart. Decatur watched the traitor's body dragged away and felt no victory, only emptiness. Anne holstered the pistol with trembling hands, the scent of burnt powder searing her memory. The captain raised his eyes and saw, through the mist, 3 enemy silhouettes closing the noose. "Prepare the cannons," he ordered. "They think they have us. We'll teach them what it means to be hunted." The Endymion's first shot pierced the mist like a sentence. The British cannon roared, the sound multiplying across the ocean, echoing in the President's bows. The impact shook the deck and hurled 2 sailors overboard before they could scream. Decatur didn't blink. "Return fire," he said, and American thunder replied with the force of 24 fiery mouths. The battle had begun, and the sea was now just a stage of iron and powder. Anne was on the lower deck, noting what she saw with hands already trembling from exhaustion. Each shot made the floor quake, and the scent of powder mixed with blood and burning wood dominated the air. Men shouted orders and prayers in the same breath, trying to keep rhythm amid chaos. "Faster!" bellowed the gunmaster, hands blackened by soot. The ship breathed with effort but still roared like a cornered beast. Decatur climbed to the bridge, coat torn and face soot-covered. "Adjust the side battery angle by 2 degrees. We'll fire close like smiths on an anvil." He knew he was shortening the distance between glory and death. The Endymion, lighter, circled back like a calculating predator, seeking the weakened flank. Anne watched him from afar, understanding the captain defended not just a ship, but a nation's pride. Interior gun temperature 47 degrees Celsius after 20 consecutive shots. Average recoil pressure 6,000 psi. Sustained cadence 2 shots per minute in prolonged combat. Sails fluttered with the shot's vibration, stays groaned under waves and wind impact. Bronze fragments and iron splinters streaked the air like metallic bee swarms. American precision surprised even the captain himself. The sound of glory is indistinguishable from the sound of destruction. The deck trembled like a heart about to stop, and every man fought with eyes that already knew the price. Anne closed the journal and climbed, stumbling over bodies and broken barrels. The sky was red, the sea gray, and between them only fire. When the smoke parted, Decatur saw something that made him smile, the Endymion's mainmast beginning to topple. Hell had an American name and rhythm. The sea seemed silent, but it was illusion. The cannon's roar had turned to a continuous buzz in the survivors' ears. Decatur looked around and saw the deck as battlefield and steel workshop. "Keep firing," he shouted, voice hoarse from powder and desperation. And, wounded in the shoulder, still recorded with blood on the pages. The wind carried scents of hot iron and brine, a mixture only war knows how to distill. A true shot hit the stern and shattered the rudder. The impact threw the captain against the mast, spinning the world for an instant. "Manual control," bellowed the boatswain as sailors lashed ropes to the improvised helm. Anne ran to him, face pale and eyes full of fear. "The rudder's gone." "No, just changed places," Decatur replied, trying to smile. Stubbornness was still his compass. The Endymion, bleeding and furious, closed again. The sea between them seemed to boil, covered in debris and bodies. "Prepare double charge," the captain ordered. The carronade spat flames, and the air vibrated like a bronze bell about to shatter. The broadside's shock made the hull creak like a wounded animal. Wood smoked, sails burned, and the President fought the inevitable with the fury of a fallen god. Short-range firing pressure, 9,000 psi. Hull deformation rate, 12% in midsections. Rudder efficiency loss, 85%. Each number was a sentence, but also testimony. The entire deck vibrated like a string about to snap. Even so, the ship kept firing, guided by instinct and pure command. American resistance was no longer tactic, it was belief made material in wood. The hero doesn't fear defeat, he fears oblivion. Anne knelt beside Decatur,
holding his blood and soot-covered hand. "Is it over?" she asked. "Not yet," he replied, staring at the fire-covered horizon. The ship groaned beneath them, but the flames still burned. The USS President was no longer just a frigate. It was the last cry of a nation refusing to sink in silence. The silence after the last shot was more deafening than the battle. The USS President floated like a smoking shadow, half steel, half memory. The surrounding sea was a field of wreckage, torn sails, and men on their knees. The Endymion, also mutilated, kept distance. Respect had replaced hate. Decatur wiped blood from his face and watched the horizon, unblinking. "They didn't win. We just survived too much." Anne sat beside him, journal smudged with soot and tears. The pages, once full of words, now seemed to refuse recording the end. "Captain, it's over," she said, voice hoarse. "Nothing ends while someone still remembers," he replied, looking at the broken mast. A weak wind passed, and for an instant the tattered sailcloth sounded like distant applause. Even the ocean seemed to acknowledge the feat. The American flag, charred at the edges, still fluttered stubbornly atop the mainmast. A wounded sailor held it in his teeth while lashing the torn cloth with a blood-stained rope. "As long as there's a flag, there's a ship," he shouted. The men joined in a hoarse, weary roar, more tear than voice. In that instant, no one fought for victory. They fought for dignity. Structural damage, 68% of hull. Total rudder loss, deck integrity reduced by 41%, 14 cannons still operational, 92% powder consumption. Even damaged, the President maintained impressive stability thanks to double internal frame reinforcement. The British watched stunned, realizing they'd face something statistics couldn't explain. Engineering became legend. Dignity is the defeated's last flag. Decatur, exhausted, raised his eyes to the overcast sky and whispered a brief prayer. Anne watched him with a mix of admiration and grief. The ocean has no winners, only survivors who become stories. When the captain ordered ceasefire, the sea replied with calm, and American pride, though beaten, remained standing. London awoke to seaborne news. Newspapers blared in black letters, USS President captured, but untamable. The British public, accustomed to Nelson's glory, read of an enemy that refused to die. "The ship that didn't know how to sink," said the Times headline. British victory rang like a confession. The world's mightiest navy had learned, through pain, the meaning of respect. In Portsmouth's naval yard, engineers examined the President's wreckage. Every detail, every reinforcement, every curve of wood and copper was studied with scientific reverence. This isn't luck, it's bold engineering. Plans were copied, techniques adapted. The defeated enemy now became unwitting master. British pride absorbed humiliation with pencil and ruler.
War has always been a good teacher. Meanwhile, in New York, the name President echoed through ports and taverns. Sailors told exaggerated tales of the clash, cannons spitting fire for hours, sails resisting death itself. Anne, silent survivor, wrote the final account under lamplight. "They won the battle, but we won eternity," she recorded, and the phrase sounded like epitaph and promise. British analyses confirmed 35% superior resistance to era-average frigates, innovative hydrodynamic curve, and unprecedented crossed keel reinforcement. The ship was the work of engineers and dreamers, a mix of precision and madness. In American yards, President became a model for the future. Every new design carried a fragment of that heroic defeat. American engineering redefined the impossible. The President didn't win the war, but won time, becoming a symbol of obstinacy and innovation. Anne closed the journal, looked to the horizon, and murmured, "They can copy the hull, but never the heart." The distant waves replied like confirmation, and in the cold Atlantic wind, the echo of President kept sailing. Years had passed, but the Atlantic still held the same sound,
the waves crashing against the invisible, as if trying to wake the past. In a silent New York shipyard, a young engineer studied Anne Bradbury's notebooks, now aged and salt-stained. He read the pages like listening to ancient voices. Decatur, the shots, the bronze roar. "The sea doesn't forget," she wrote, and the young man believed. The legend had become a steel script. The apprentice ran his fingers over the president's drawings, firm and visionary lines. The curved hull to face the wind, the reinforced beam, the courage of error, he murmured, tracing new plans on yellowed paper. The distant hammer sounds echoed as if the shipyard still remembered the past's cadence. "A ship doesn't die if its dream keeps floating," the master builder said, watching the boy work. It was the birth of a new era, the age of iron. On the docks, old stories were still told under the scent of fish and rum. Sailors spoke of Decatur like a sea saint. "He challenged the impossible and made it tremble," one said. "The president never surrendered, just rested," another finished. Laughter came slow between gulps and memories. Night mist descended on the masts, and for an instant the ship's shadow seemed still there, alive, proud, awaiting orders. The young engineer's design would inspire the USS Monitor, America's first ironclad, launched in 1862. The double reinforcement principle, hull compaction, and stability control came straight from the president's records. A ship lost to the waves shaped the future. The Gunpowder era's history became the Iron era's, and ancient cannon sounds echoed in new forges. Defeat had turned to casting. Defeat can be the seed of supremacy. The sea keeps everything. The shot sounds, smoke scent, names of those who dared the impossible. Anne died old, journal on her chest, and they say on stormy nights the ocean still repeats her words. Between the cannon roar and ocean's silence, honor sails alone. The sea doesn't forget. It just changes voice.